Next month, or I suppose potentially in the past, depending on when you're watching this, we will see the release, or have seen the release, of 3 new Doctor Who novelizations. That being Aliens of London by Joseph Lister, The Satan Pit by Matt Jones, and The Time of Angels by Jenny Colgan. We haven't technically seen novelizations of past modern Who stories since 2023, I believe, and after that, we received novelizations for the concurrent series Season 1 and Season 2, and we got quite a few of those. But now, with Season 2 finishing, we are returning to hopefully yearly novelizations of Modern Who stories. You can actually find a listing on Amazon for a James Goss novelization scheduled initially for at the end of 2026, but now for 2027. So the yearly kind of group of Modern Who novelizations should hopefully be returning. But the question I'm wondering, before I've even read any of the new novelizations, is what's next? Because I'm always scrolling and seeing people's predictions of what comes next, and I actually genuinely wanted to break it down and see exactly what would make sense for future Doctor Who target novelization releases. Obviously, I guess the aim is at the end of the day to kind of novelize most, if not all of them, if they can. But what I want to look at is the most reasonable expectations for the next group of novelizations, not necessarily the future of all of them. Like, at the end of the day, quite a lot of them could be novelized, but I want to look at the next group of novelizations. I'll speak more on it at the end when I'm talking about my final predictions, but I'd say we're looking about 3, maybe 4 releases specifically for next year, and I'll get into why further towards the end. As well as that, I'll go through some necessary statistics that would help you potentially decide what you think could be the next group of novelizations. I'll try not to ramble. It's going to take quite a while to go through every single series, so I will try and be really quick, but I've got these handy little graphics to help you understand what I'm talking about. Previous novelizations and color coding for kind of likely, unlikely, and quite confident future novelizations. So starting with Series 1, we can see that there's already been 3 novelizations for Series 1, or in my case, there is going to be another novelization for Series 1 next month in Aliens of London and World War III by Joseph Lister. But as we can see, Series 1 is technically the most novelized series. I know 3 doesn't sound like a lot, but at the moment, that is the case. So there's not a very high chance that another Series 1 novelization will occur next year, especially considering we had one this year. As you can see by my current color coding, the orangey ones are basically unlikely. And I think I didn't really need to look into them too much. I pretty much confident that Series 1 is very unlikely to be included in the next batch of novelizations. The long game specifically is very unlikely. I think that's just due to there being very little interest in novelizing this story compared to the rest of Series 1. Like, if they were to do a future novelization for Series 1, I feel like maybe Father's Day would be a really good choice. Get Paul Cornell back to novelize that one, or maybe even The Unquiet Dead with Mark Gatiss, something like that. The long game is going to be right at the bottom of the list, I can imagine. Moving on to Series 2, you can see we've obviously got 2 novelizations, one of those being in March 2026, The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit by the original writer Matt Jones, which is very exciting. We've also got The Christmas Invasion by Jenny Colgan, which, much like Rose in the previous series, was one of the first novelizations of Modern Who to be put out when they kind of revived the imprint basically in 2018. There was a bit of a gap between 2018 and 2021 when they properly started it again, but The Christmas Invasion was one of the first ones they did, and it seems like, especially with one of the other releases we've got on in 2026, that Jenny Colgan is kind of a go-to when it comes to covering a story that the original writer is not returning for. In terms of what I think in this series could be novelized next, I've basically crossed off Love and Monsters and Fear Her. I just don't think there's any desire for that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do have a soft spot for Love and Monsters, and I actually would love to read a novelization for Love and Monsters, but I can't imagine it's very likely at all. So much so that I've kind of just grayed it out here. I really don't think that they're going to be doing that, especially even anytime soon. One of the biggest things that I'm using to make predictions is the fact that the most recent novelizations, the ones that are coming out or have come out in March 2026, are all novelizations of two-parters, so much like here, The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit. So as such, I've kind of assumed that they're probably not going to do two-parters again next time around. I mean, I'd be interested to see kind of how big these books are. I'm pretty sure we know what the page counts are already, but if you take something like the Zygon Invasion novelization by Peter Harness, it is very, very small. And even something like The Day of the Doctor is actually quite short as well, for something that is actually novelizing quite a much longer story, basically, whether that be the 50th anniversary special or a two-parter. So, but something like The Reality War, that book is chunky. For a novelization, is potentially one of the biggest ones. I'm not 100% sure. But as such, I really don't think they'll be novelizing two-parters next. There's a couple of exceptions that I've made further down the line. We'll get to those. But here, Rise of the Cybermen, The Age of Steel, and Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, I really don't think they'll be novelizing those just because they are two-parters. As well as New Earth and Tooth and Claw. I don't think they'll be novelizing any Russell T Davies stories. I don't think that's really just the thing to be doing at the moment. You know, he's had his run recently with the new seasons, and I don't think they do tend to prioritize bringing the original writers back, but I'm going to assume that they're going to try and get the original writers back. Obviously, these three that are releasing at the moment, we've actually got two people covering for the original writers, but that doesn't generally tend to happen. The two that I think are very likely from series 2 is School Reunion and The Girl in the Fireplace. I have reason to believe, and I'll get into this later, that Stephen Moffat could potentially be returning to novelize another story. He novelized The Day of the Doctor in 2018 again, I believe. But School Reunion specifically, I mean, there's so much love around that story. Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane is obviously going to always be iconic. And Toby Whitehouse, I don't know, is a phenomenal writer. He's written many really good Doctor Who stories, and some of the later ones are also contenders. But School Reunion is probably one of the ones that are up there for me for one of his stories to be novelized, and if he could return up to do that, that would obviously be great. Stephen Moffat returning to write something would most likely be one of his kind of stories from his era, the time like 11th and 12th Doctor era. But I could see The Girl in the Fireplace being novelized. Either he would return for that, or potentially someone else could cover for him. Maybe Jenny Colgan, I don't know. She's already written for the Christmas Invasion in this series, so she would have some idea of writing for the 10th Doctor. Moving on to Series 3, you can see here that there's actually not been a single novelization for Series 3. You might think that's quite odd, especially because there are a lot of solid stories in Series 3 that could be novelized. But if we have a look at kind of my predictions for potential novelizations of Series 3, it's quite slim pickings. We'll start off specifically, the Shakespeare Code, never going to happen. The writer is a transphobe. That's going to come up a little bit more later on. Human Nature and the Family of Blood. That was literally already a novel. That was a Paul Cornell novel from the 90s, and he adapted that into TV. So to adapt the TV episode back in, I mean, obviously it's not necessarily a direct adaptation. It's the 7th Doctor and it's the 10th Doctor, but then to novelize that wouldn't really make any sense. And then Utopia, The Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords. I've clumped those together. Would be quite a massive undertaking to novelize all three of those episodes in a consistent manner. Like, I'm sure they could do it, but I don't think it would be a good idea. The Runaway Bride, Smith and Jones, Gridlock, they're Russell T Davies stories that I don't think will be novelized. The Daleks two-parts, Daleks in Manhattan, Evolution of the Daleks is obviously it's a two-parter, so I don't think that will be happening. But I would imagine Helen Rayner would be up for novelizing one of her stories, but she's only written two-parters, so I don't think it would be part of the next bunch, maybe the bunch after that. The Lazarus Experiment, it's not very well received, but Stephen Greenhorn, the writer, could definitely return to write this, like, in the future, but I do think one of his later stories is much more likely. 42, as you can see here, is even darker. I don't think it's impossible for, like, Chris Chibnall to return to write 42, and I do actually, you'll see later on, think he could potentially write something from later series. But it wouldn't make sense for him to do 42. It's not a very popular story, and he's got better options that I'm sure he would prefer to write for from his own era. Blink, obviously, Blink is like one of the most popular stories of all time. But I think it would be very difficult for them to novelize that. And it's a Stephen Moffat story as well. I feel like he would choose to write something from his era, like I said before. Series 4, as you can see, we've had 2 novelizations for Series 4, The Fires of Pompeii and Planet of the Ood. Initially, like I've reviewed both of those on my channel. I've reviewed a lot of these novelizations on my channel. Planet of the Ood is one of my least favorite ones, and I was confused initially as to why they chose Planet of the Ood. I mean, as you can see here with my predictions, there's not actually a lot of options from what I can tell. I mean, maybe in the past, the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poisoned Sky from Helen Rayner would have been a good choice. But here you've got like Voyage of the Damned, Partners in Crime, Midnight, Turn Left, Stolen Earth, Journey's End. Midnight would be very difficult, but they're all Russell T Davies stories again. Turn Left would be really interesting if it did happen, but then obviously Stolen Earth is also a 2-parter, so I just think that's kind of out of the picture, those stories, unfortunately. Unicorn and the Wasp, written by a transphobe again, so that's never going to happen. The Doctor's Daughter is probably my prime choice for this one. This is another Stephen Greenhorn story, and I think probably the most likely option for one of his if he could return and write one. I think this would be great. It's like semi-loved. You've obviously got David Tennant's wife Georgia in it. Georgia is phenomenal in this story, and it is a nice story. You've got multiple companions, multiple stories that I do think work in a book form, so I think that would be quite good. Moving on to the Series 4 specials, we had The Waters of Mars novelised by Phil Ford in July 2023, and I don't think there's many options here either. Planet of the Dead, written by a transphobe. The Next Doctor and The End of Time Part 1 and 2, they're Russell T Davies stories. One of them's a Christmas story, and I don't really know if they'll novelize one. I do think they'll potentially novelize a Christmas story, just looking at the release date for the next batch, just going off of the James Goss listing on Amazon. They could potentially be doing a Christmas one. It is early next year. Obviously, that's not around Christmas, but in the past, obviously, they released The Christmas Invasion and Twice Upon a Time as one of the first batch of novelizations, and that was in like, what, April, I think? I can't remember. So it could potentially happen because it's around the same time next year that they do a Christmas one, and there's a couple of contenders for that, which again, I'll get into in a little bit, but The Next Doctor, probably not one of the top choices, and The End of Time is obviously a 2-parter, and it would be quite a big undertaking. Whether I don't think Russell T Davies would basically do that, and I don't know if someone else would be brought on to novelize something of that magnitude. Series 5, we're getting the first novelization, The Time of Angels by Jenny Colgan, next month, March 2026, which is very, very exciting. There's quite a few choices, I think, from Series 5 that could be chosen. Like I said, I'm quite confident that maybe Stephen Moffat could be writing something for the next batch, so The 11th Hour would be a great choice. It's a well-loved opener, and it would follow the adaptations of Rose and the Christmas Invasion, and later down the line maybe Deep Breath as well. The Beast Below, it's a good easy one-off novel, and it has options within there. You know, there is some stuff that Moffat could do with that. Victory of the Daleks, it's an easy Mark Gatiss script with a lot of room to explore. Vampires of Venice, there's more likely Toby Whitehouse stories that would be novelized, like I've said, so probably not going to go for that, but it's not impossible. Amy's Choice would be a solid choice. Simon and I could definitely return to write this, and I would very much enjoy reading a novelization of this. I think the ones that I'm most particularly interested in are novelizations that aren't just cut and dry. And is that what you say? They're not just taking the episode and writing it down. Ones that explore. I mean, because there's a lot of differences between these modern Who novelizations and the classic Who novelizations. Most, if not all, of the classic Who novelizations were released in order to basically give fans a way to experience the story, and not necessarily a way to elaborate on all of these things, because these modern Who novelizations, fans who are reading these have watched these episodes hundreds and hundreds of times potentially, so it's not really worth it just writing down the episode. So here my personal choices are stories that would allow the writers to explore them even more, and I think Amy's Choice would be a perfect opportunity for that. Moving on, The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, that's a Chibnall story, and I don't think if he did return he would write that, but never say never. Vincent and the Doctor, it would be insane if Richard Curtis did write Vincent and the Doctor as a novelisation. It's very, very unlikely. It's not impossible for someone else maybe to write it instead. I just don't think Richard Curtis would ever do that. The Lodger was written by Transphobe, and I've obviously gone over the Pandorica Opens and the Big Bang. So on to Series 6. Again, like Series 3, nothing novelised, and it is going to be one of these stories I have put down as one of my final predictions. But as you can see here, there are a couple options and a couple probably not going to happen options. I'm basing this off nothing. Mostly just pure speculation, but I just feel the vibe that Moffat could potentially write another one, but maybe they don't have the budget for that. I don't know, but I feel like he would want to anyway. One of the Moffat options that I would think that, especially like I was saying with the Christmas stuff, that could potentially happen is A Christmas Carol, which would be pretty cool for Moffat to return for that. But that's the only one I think that Stephen Moffat would be likely to write within that series. The Impossible Astronaut, Day of the Moon, The Rebel Flesh, The Almost People, just saying that we're not getting those solely because of that we're getting the two-parters in March. The Curse of the Black Spot is one of 3 pretty likely Steve Thompson scripts, and I think it could have room to explore. A Good Man Goes to War, Let's Kill Hitler, and The Wedding of River Song, they're all Moffat stories that I think are quite unlikely to be options. Night Terrors is not a very popular story, and there are better Mark Gatiss scripts for them to choose from. The Girl Who Waited, I think that does have potential to be a really, really good novelisation from Tom McRae over the Age of Steel, Rise of the Cybermen two-parter, if that was between the options. And The God Complex would be also a very easy one-off Toby Whithouse option. And of course, Closing Time was written by a transphobe, and The Doctor's Wife, well, is written by Neil Gaiman, which is a shame because he's written some great stuff, and it's a shame that there's even... I have no words. Neil Gaiman, you disappoint me. Moving on, I've split up Series 7 into 7A and 7B just because there's quite a lot there. Series 7A doesn't have any novelizations at the moment. There's only a couple I think that could be novelized, but starting with The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, pretty unlikely for that one to be novelized. It's not a very popular Christmas special. Same thing with Asylum of the Daleks. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, The Power of Three, both Chris Chibnall stories. So again, like I said, if he was to write something, it would probably be a later era, like his era, so it wouldn't be one of these. A Town Called Mercy and The Angels Take Manhattan are probably my top choices for this one, and I think they are quite likely. Town Called Mercy is again a solid one-off Toby Whithouse script, and The Angels Take Manhattan is a solid Stephen Moffat pick, even if he doesn't write it. You could novelize additionally the Rory Story webcast that they released during lockdown and the PS kind of cut prologue that Chris Chibnall wrote. I think that it would be options for adding more stuff in there, as well as taking stuff potentially from the Melody Malone book, the Angel's Kiss, I think it is. I'm pretty sure they released that, like a significant, like that was kind of released in the Summer, Fall and Other Summer. Is it called Summer, Fall and Other Stories? I'm not sure. A little bit in there, so it's kind of a semi novelized already, but those would be my options for 7A. Moving on to 7B, we've already had a couple of novelizations. We had The Crimson Horror in 2021 and The Day of the Doctor as part of the original batch in 2018. Interesting option, The Crimson Horror, but I don't dislike it that much. It's actually not a bad novelization from Mark Gatiss, potentially better than the actual episode as well, which you don't really get very often. The most obvious one here, Nightmare in Silver, written by Neil Gaiman again, so unfortunately that's just not going to happen. The Snowmen, The Bells of St. John, The Name of the Doctor, probably quite unlikely Stephen Moffat picks. Time of the Doctor could be a likely Stephen Moffat pick if they went the Christmas special route, especially because it's Matt Smith's final one. And like, one of my issues with Twice Upon a Time was that the regeneration sequence at the end was quite crap, basically, and I think it would be good to have Stephen Moffat writing that and the regeneration sequence, you know, with having had time to reflect on it as well. The Rings of Akaten and Hyde, both written by Neil Cross, I feel like they're both solid picks. I feel like if they were to novelize one, they'd probably do Hyde. I mean, they're not necessarily very popular, but I think they would be pretty good options for novelizations. I think Hyde probably has the upper hand over the Rings of Akaten. I do personally really like the Rings of Akaten, so I would love to read it as a novelization, but I think Hyde owes itself more to being in a novel form. Cold War, there's already a Mark Gatiss novelization within this series, so it's probably unlikely. And Journey to the Center of the TARDIS is more likely than Cold War, but it's less likely Steve Thompson's script out of the 3 options, but it's not impossible. Series 8, again, we've got another series that has absolutely no novelizations, so well, let's see what could potentially be going on in Series 8. Series 8, I'll spoil it a little bit. One of these is also going to be one of my options for predicting. Like, it makes sense to do these. There's nothing novelized here, and there's only a couple Peter Capaldi novelizations. I'll get into the stats of the novelizations later on, but there's so many great options from Series 8. Deep Breath, Last Christmas, and Listen, they're all potential Stephen Moffat picks for like an opener story like Deep Breath, a Christmas story like Last Christmas, obviously, and Listen, I think Stephen Moffat is quite happy, quite likes that story, and it could, again, owe itself to more possibilities in novelization form. Time Heist is the third Stephen Thompson option, which I think would be actually a pretty solid choice. It's similar to like them novelizing Crimson Horror and Planet of the Ood and Kablam. They're all these like one-off stories that aren't necessarily hated for the most part, and they have options. It's just whether those authors actually choose to expand upon what they've written in the past. The Caretaker was written by Transphobe. Kill the Moon is not the most popular, but Peter Harness has already novelized the Zygon Invasion and Zygon Inversion, so he could have another go at novelizing a book in this story, so obviously it would help that he's done something already. Mummy on the Orient Express, Flatline, these are Jamie Matheson's first Doctor Who contributions, and both very good options. I'd say Flatline might owe itself more to being novelized. Mummy on the Orient Express is phenomenal, and I think I prefer it over Flatline, but I can just kind of picture Flatline as a novelization, so it would be really, really good. In the Forest of the Night, it's probably quite unlikely. It's not very popular, and there's definitely a better Frank Cottrell Boyce option if he were able to do a novelization. Robot of Sherwood, I accidentally missed, but that's again another Mark Gatiss story that's probably quite unlikely, given the amount of different options for him. And then Dark Water and Death in Heaven, that's a 2-parter, so it's probably not going to happen. Series 9, we had one novelization that was, like I mentioned, Peter Harness's The Zygon Invasion. The problem with Series 9 is obviously there's a bunch of 2-parters, but as you can see here, I have actually said that I think I'd probably make an exception for Heaven Sent and Hellbent, just because it's obviously such a popular story that it could make sense to novelize that, and I think it would give Stephen Moffat or potentially another writer an option to rejig Hellbent a little bit to fit more with Heaven Sent. They are 2 very, very different stories, and it doesn't really, like, they obviously continue into one another, but they don't necessarily gel together like a 2-parter should. So someone could have that option. Sleep No More, again, it's another unlikely Mark Gatiss pick. It's quite a forgettable story, but Face the Raven would be a really solid Sarah Dollard pick. She's written a couple of stories, and I think this one and the other one that she's done would be very, very solid options, and I think she would be able to do a novelization. The Husbands of River Song is, again, like, I think another solid Stephen Moffat Christmas pick. If they were to do that, to get Stephen Moffat back, do a Christmas episode, and, you know, do something like that, it could be Last Christmas, it could be Christmas Carol, it could be The Husbands of River Song. I think it really depends. I think The Husbands of River Song is a very sweet story, so it could be pretty good, but obviously all the other 2-parters I just think are probably quite unlikely to be chosen. Later down the line, something like Under the Lake, Before the Flood, Girl Who Died and the Woman Who Lived, they're probably good contenders for novelizations, but probably not anytime soon. Series 10, we've got a couple of novelizations already. We've got The Eaters of Light by Ronan Munro and Twice Upon a Time by Paul Cornell. The options here are quite all over the place. The Return of Dr. Mysterio is probably an unlikely option, even if Stephen Moffat happened to come back and did a Christmas one, then it probably wouldn't be this one. The Pilot and Smile and Thin Ice, definitely great options. I think the Pilot could be something that Stephen Moffat might want to do, or someone else potentially. Smile is the more likely Frank Cottrell Boyce option. In the Forest of the Night is probably not a great choice. And Thin Ice is the other Sarah Dollard choice. I think that one would be quite interesting to see novelized. Knock Knock has potential, but Mike Bartlett, like all of these people I'm mentioning, some of them have authorial experience, like writing books and stuff like that. Some of them don't, but I think that wouldn't really make a difference in terms of these novelizations. Mike Bartlett is a really busy playwright, so I doubt that he would, and he's also not written a lot of books, if any, so I doubt he would come back to do Knock Knock, but maybe someone else could. Oxygen is another Jamie Matheson option. Not my first choice for sure. I think it's quite forgettable. Extremist, Pyramid of the End of the World, Eye of the Land, and as well as World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls. As much as I would love to see novelizations, both of those, specifically World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls, and they're very, very unlikely. They're quite big two-parters. And then the Monk trilogy has 3 different writers that wrote it. You've got Stephen Moffat, Peter Harness, and Toby Whitehouse that novelized all of those, so it could be a bit difficult to figure out who should do that. Empress of Mars, again, it's just, I mean, like, all of these Mark Gatiss options could potentially happen, but they don't blow me away as picks that should definitely be written. So Empress of Mars, probably not, but you never know. Moving on to Series 11, we've had 2 novelizations. Kablam in 2023 by Pete McTighe, the original writer, and Joy Wilkinson, the original writer, wrote The Witchfinders in 2021. The Woman Who Fell to Earth, like I said, I think Chris Chibnall could potentially be writing one of the next lot. I don't know whether they would get Chris Chibnall and Stephen Moffat together in a batch of stuff. I mean, they did Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies in 2018 together, but The Woman Who Fell to Earth, I think, would be a very likely Chris Chibnall option. It's obviously the first one that he wrote, and it's quite a popular 13th Doctor story. The Ghost Monument, Arachnids in the UK, the Saranga Conundrum, Ranscore Av Kolos, Resolution, I think they're all very unlikely Chris Chibnall stories. I don't want to rule out the Ghost Monument and Resolution, but the other 3, I don't see why anyone would choose to novelize those ones. Sorry, Chris Chibnall. It Takes You Away, I don't want to rule that one out either. Ed Heim could potentially novelize that one, but because of how badly perceived Orphan 55 is, I doubt they'd even get him to write It Takes You Away. You never know, like I'm not ruling it out, and it could be really good, but he's not got a lot of credits, so it's probably unlikely. Demons of the Punjab is probably one of my top picks for novelizing this. I love Vinay Patel. Out of the couple options for Vinay Patel returning to write something, this is my one. He doesn't have like any book writing credits, but I don't think that really makes a difference with these novelizations a lot of the time. I mean, it would help, obviously, but Vinay Patel I would love Demons of the Punjab as a novelization. Similar thing with Rosa, but I think Mallory Blackman could potentially do that, but otherwise I think someone else could potentially come and write that. But I would love Mallory Blackman to write Rosa, but I would imagine she might not have the time. I don't know, might not be on the top of her agenda. But Rosa would be a great choice, and I think it is actually quite likely. Series 12, no novelizations. Some of them are quite good options because there are quite a few extra writers for some of these. But I mean, Chris Chibnall, he co-wrote and wrote a lot of the episodes of this era, and that might have been one of the issues because some of the best episodes are ones that he didn't write. But Spyfall and Ascension of the Cybermen, Timeless Children, 2-parters, so probably not likely for the next batch. Orphan 55 is never going to happen. I mean, at least not anytime soon, I hope. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror as a pretty likely Nina Metivier pick. I think she would be fine returning for that. Fugitive of June is again another likely Vinay Patel option, which could come in line with all of the Circuit Breaker Fugitive Doctor stuff later this year. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. Can You Hear Me? No, I missed one. Praxius. It's not impossible because obviously Pete McTighe wrote Kablam, but probably quite unlikely, having just come off of the War Between production and stuff. So, but you know, maybe he could write it this year, and that's why it would be released next year. I don't really know on the timescale of a lot of these novels. Can You Hear Me could be a solid option as well. I'm not a massive fan of series 12, but Charlene James, Writer of Can You Hear Me, could probably novelize that one. Villa Diodati, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, is the most likely Maxine Alderton pick, but I don't think they would choose to do that one because of how closely linked to Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children it is. It feels like a weird thing to novelize and then have lead into something else that you can't read. And Revolution of the Daleks is just another unlikely Chris Chibnall option, basically. I've skipped Flux. I feel like the novelizations for Flux would be quite difficult. Would you novelize singular stories? Or would you I don't know if they're ever going to novelize Flux, basically, but if they did, it would probably be like a massive book, or maybe maybe they wouldn't necessarily release it all at once, but they would probably slowly pick away at it in a considerable, over quite a few number of years, maybe one release here, one release there, but it would be something that they would have to specifically set their mind to, being like, okay, we're going to novelize Flux. One of the releases of each of our batches is going to be from Flux or something like that. And that would be quite a big, maybe a risk to take, I don't know, to commit to all of those stories. But I haven't put anything down for those. I don't think they're very likely at all, so there's no point having a look at them. The Series 13 specials, on the other hand, there's a couple options there. There are literally a couple of options. I think Legend of the Sea Devils probably isn't a solid option. I find it very unlikely just due to the reception of it, but Eve of the Daleks could be a Chibnall option if he did want to go the New Year special route. But I think The Power of the Doctor is probably a lot more likely here. I think that's probably the option that Chris Chibnall would go for if he was to novelize something. I haven't looked at anything from season 1 and 2. I think they're very unlikely to be novelized in general. There's one exception that I think could potentially be novelized, but I very much doubt that they'll be doing any season 1 and 2 novelizations. Obviously, they've done all the 60th anniversary ones as well. They did all 3 of those when they released. They released novelizations of season 1 and 2 concurrently with them coming out, and there's quite a few of them already, so it's unlikely that they would do any 15th Doctor stuff. But I'm not necessarily ruling it out, but I find it very, very unlikely that they would. If we just have a look at some of the stats, this is going to help you kind of visualize what's been done and what hasn't. Obviously, the 10th Doctor has had the most novelizations. That's to be expected, really. Series 2 and Series 4 plus the specials, that's kind of where it's been at. But Series 1, as you can see, discounting like specials and stuff, is the most novelized series, so I'd be very surprised if they did another one next year. But as you can see, the 13th Doctor is one behind at least the 11th, 12th and 9th Doctor, so it's very likely that I think she will get a novelization, and I just have no reason behind this, but I have vibes that maybe Chris Chibnall will write one. I have no particular reason why, but I just feel like it's about time. Why not? 4 of the total novelizations weren't written by the original writers. So that's The Christmas Invasion by Jenny Colgan, The Time of Angels by Jenny Colgan, Aliens of London by Joseph Lidster, and Twice Upon a Time by Paul Cornell. But the reason behind usually that happening, or at least it was seemingly the case for The Christmas Invasion and Twice Upon a Time, is that the original authors were writing something else. So The Christmas Invasion was originally written by Russell T Davies, but he novelized Rose for that release, and Twice Upon a Time was originally written by Stephen Moffat, but he novelized The Day of the Doctor for that release. So my assumption with Jenny Colgan and Joseph Lidster writing The Time of Angels and Aliens of London is that potentially they are covering for Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat because they're writing something else and maybe they want to take more time, or maybe they're too busy at the moment. But I don't think Russell T Davies is very likely as an option. He's obviously just come off of season 1 and 2, and I don't know if he really wants to novelize anything at the moment. Like, he's been very Doctor Who heavy at the moment, so it would make sense for him to have a bit of a break. Yeah, I wouldn't put money on Russell T Davies doing it. That's why I think Moffat is probably a more likely candidate. And like I said, 13th Doctor is due a novelisation, so I can definitely see Chris Chibnall returning to pen an adaptation of one of his stories. Like I said before, there's a listing on Amazon for novelisation from James Goss, so I think that is pretty likely not a mistake. But because he's written The Giggle and Lux previously, the novelisations for those, I feel like there's a solid chance that he'll be doing another 15th Doctor story. So that is my exception for 9 to 13. I do feel like there'll be one 15th Doctor novelisation, and I'll let you know what I think that one will be in a second. Additionally, I don't want to rule out, like I said before, there could be 3 or 4 novelizations. So I am erring on the side of 4 novelizations, and at least it gives me an extra option if I'm wrong. But that would potentially be quite a risky move if they wanted to novelize the 4 novelizations is not the risky move, but the risky move could be novelizing the 2026 Christmas special. They did it similarly with Twice Upon a Time, and that was written kind of before the actual episode came out, before Paul Cornell could technically see the full thing broadcast. So it would be a bit of a risky move, especially given just kind of the atmosphere of Doctor Who fans at the moment. But it's not impossible. I don't want to say no, but it's not what I think that they would do. So my final predictions. Starting off with one of my less likely options is The 11th Hour by Stephen Moffat. I have another option that I'll say in a second, but I think The 11th Hour could potentially be, I feel like if he was to choose a regular episode, it would be The 11th Hour. But my main choice for Stephen Moffat would be A Christmas Carol. I feel like that would be a solid choice. It makes sense with the timeline from previous Christmas novelizations, and if Stephen Moffat was to return, I think for a Christmas novelisation, I think that would be one of them. But I didn't want to dismiss The 11th Hour because I feel like that would probably be the next choice for a novelisation, and maybe that would lead the way for Deep Breath and The Woman Who Fell to Earth later on and stuff like that. I forgot to mention, actually, sorry, I've got at the bottom here, which Doctors got releases when. And the main thing to note is that the 10th Doctor got 2 in 2023. What's that about? But I think they did 9, 10, and 11 this year, right? So it makes sense for them to do like 12, 13, 15. But obviously I do think there'll be 4 novelizations. So let me get into the rest of them now. That's obviously my choice for the 11th Doctor. I think for the 12th Doctor, my second option, I'll go for my least likely option and then my more likely option. My second option is Time Heist, Stephen Thompson writing Time Heist. I think that's a decent option for Series 8, which has no novelizations. Similarly with A Christmas Carol, it's semi-series 6, so I think that would fill the gap for having, because it has no novelizations. So that's why I went with Time Heist. But my more confident option for also Series 8 would be Flatline by Jamie Matheson. I think this would be a really solid option, and I can just kind of picture the cover and with the small little TARDIS and the 2D guys, the boneless or whatever, and it would be quite an interesting thing to novelize. Clara's the main character, the Doctor's stuck in the TARDIS, little TARDIS, and that would be quite interesting. So I think that's the more likely option. Moving on to 13th Doctor options, I have 2 kind of secondary options. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror by Nina Mativier and Can You Hear Me by Charlene James, both solid Series 12 options. I think Series 12 is obviously it's missing. It's not got any novelizations, so it makes sense. And those are 2 authors who I feel like could try their hand at doing a novelization. But my most likely option, maybe it's not most likely option, but I just my vibe, my spidey senses are tingling. I think The Power of the Doctor by Chris Chibnall would make a lot of sense. It's obviously the last hurrah. It's got like it has the vibe of something that could be novelized. You've got the Master, Daleks, Cybermen. You've got the Edge with all of the other Doctors showing up, which could be a fun thing to write about. And I think Chris Chibnall is due a novelization. My final option, and kind of my most confident option, is Lucky Day by James Goss. Obviously that's written by Pete McTighe, but I think he'd be quite happy after the War Between and stuff for him to novelize that. And obviously James Goss has wrote The Giggle, which was quite a big 60th anniversary undertaking, I suppose. So I think Lucky Day would be quite a solid option for James Goss to write. The other option would be like the 2026 Christmas special, or potentially The Reality War. But I mean, with the funky ending, that I don't know if they would want to novelize that in case they needed to leave the ending open-ended, or obviously they had all of the deleted scenes and stuff, and there was meant to be all this stuff with Susan that never happened. So that would be quite a tricky thing to novelize at the moment while we don't have a lot of the answers. So those are my kind of, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different options. But the ones in the middle there, Christmas Carol, Flatline, The Power of the Doctor, and Lucky Day, those are my main options. Chances are they're completely wrong. I really hope that at least one of these is correct, even if it's not even like the original author that comes to do it and it's someone like Jenny Colgan or James Goss. If I get one of these right, I'd be very surprised, because this is what I think will be novelised, with a couple of little bias options in there, like A Christmas Carol, and maybe The 11th Hour as well. But like, I do really think that there's at least 1 or 2 options in here that do make sense. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you would like and what you think will be happening, whether you think I'm completely wrong. I've probably made some mistakes in here with writers and stuff like that. It probably doesn't, some of them probably don't make any sense. There are some writers who are actually, like, obviously they're from the earlier series, who are actually like not to, you know, say that they couldn't do anything, but they're getting older, so they might not, you know, be in the right place to novelize something like that. Not saying that their stories couldn't be novelized by someone else, but some of them are in their like 70s and stuff, and they might not be able to just take on another job like that. So I imagine there's a couple of people would just say no to something like that. But again, their stories are still very much like, if they give the permission to do it, then they could be novelized. But seeing as some of these, I've basically gone off of what the gaps are, and I willed out of nowhere that Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall are going to be novelizing one. But these are kind of my main options. And yeah, I think the one I would be looking forward to the most out of here, the 2 probably, is The 11th Hour, The Power of the Doctor as well, and also maybe Flatline as well. That's a third option, but who cares. But yeah, let me know what you think of my options, and any other notes you have on how incorrect they are in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to the 3 novelizations next month. For me, they are, if you're looking at this in the future, it's still next month for me. So I'm really looking forward to reviewing those, so you'll see videos of those out in the couple months. But thank you very much for watching, and let me know if you think I'm an idiot.